a few closing remarks. I was asked what I thought of the Ontario budget. And what I think is that it was a terrible tragedy. A tragedy that didn't need to happen. People are being squeezed at all levels. We're cutting back. We're squeezing the economy when we should be expanding it. And if I were advising Premier McGuinty, I would say that he should get together with Jean Charest and the other premiers and raise Cain with the federal government and tell them that they want help, because it's the federal government which has the power over money and banking. It's the federal government which has overall responsibility for the welfare of the Canadian economy. The federal government has been downloading costs on the provinces and the territories, and the federal government has a responsibility to do something about it. It isn't right, it isn't necessary, and they should just get together and raise you-know-what until something is really done about it. And the system does work. I'm old enough to remember, in 1938 there were no jobs in Canada, none. Along comes the war, and all of a sudden, people are working in the armed forces. The unemployment reached historic lows of about 1%. And how was that possible? The Bank of Canada started printing money, printing money, in large quantities for the Government of Canada to spend into circulation. It then wound up in the private banks where it was known as high-powered money, so that the system could expand and keep everybody working and keep the economy growing. The system was in effect where the Bank of Canada provided the Government of Canada with basically zero-cost money in large quantities from 1939 until 1974. And then the Bank of Canada, in concert with the other central banks of the world, adopted the ideas of Milton Friedman and his colleagues at the University of Chicago, and it's been downhill ever since. And they made an agreement, bless their little hearts, at the Bank of International Settlements, not to supply governments with any more low-cost money, because they wanted governments to have to borrow from them and to go into debt and then pay interest and raise taxes in order to pay the interest on the money that we have to borrow from banks when they, in fact, are our creatures. And that's all they are. So this is the issue of the century. This is the issue of the century. And until our people understand more, and until our press take the trouble to try and find out how the system works, how it used to work for us, now it's now working against us, how the Bank of Canada used to serve its shareholders, and now how it's doing nothing except serving the interests of the private banks. As I said, Henry Ford said if the people really understood how the banking system works, it would be a revolution before morning. And that may have been exaggerating a little bit, but not much. If the people understood how the system really works, they would revolt, and they would insist that their governments do something for them, and not just for the bankers and bondholders and the 1% or less of the elite of the world who have been running it, and incidentally, in my opinion, running it into the ground. So I just hope and pray that something will happen. That's the reason I've dedicated my life to this issue. I realized at university, I asked my professors if recessions and depressions were necessary, and they didn't know. Their answers were unsatisfactory, and they're still unsatisfactory. There is something that can be done. It's up to the government, federal governments everywhere, but ours in particular, to do something. And we have recommended and shown how to use the Bank of Canada progressively, and it's got to be done because there's no future without it. We're just going to drift along in the same old way and maybe hope for another war to bail us out, which would be the worst possible thing that could happen. We want wars against ill health and against lack of housing and against pollution. The most important thing, finally, is that with the present system, it is impossible for us to save the planet from global warming because our government, along with other governments, do not have the fiscal flexibility to finance it, to finance the change from an oil economy to a clean energy economy. So the future of the world really literally depends on solving this problem. And we've got to get at it before it's too late, because I figure we've got about 10 years to change every car, truck, airplane, and house in the world to clean energy if we want to stop global warming before it's too late. So this is the battle we face. This is the war that's got to be won. First of all, the war of indifference and of lack of education of how the system is working, and then on with the job of introducing one that makes sense for the people of the world, and more important even, for the future of the world. So thank you very much. Appreciate it very much. Thanks. World, and more important